Welcome to Liberty Quarter Dollar, where we explore fascinating American stamps, coins, collectibles, and the stories behind them. Today, we are taking a close look at a classic United States postage stamp that is almost a century old. The stamp shown in this video is the 1932 3-cent George Washington stamp, a beautiful violet-colored issue featuring George Washington and the dates 1732 and 1932. If you have found one of these stamps in an old album, envelope, family collection, or box of vintage collectibles, you may be wondering one important question: how much could it be worth in today's market? Stay with us because we are going to examine its history, identification, condition, rarity, and realistic market value in US dollars. This stamp was issued in 1932 as part of the Washington Bicentennial Commemorative Series, celebrating 200 years since the birth of George Washington. The stamp shown here is commonly identified as Scott 720, a 3-cent Washington stamp printed in a deep violet or purple shade. The design shows a portrait of George Washington in the center, with the denomination of 3 cents displayed at the bottom. The dates 1732 and 1932 appear on the design to commemorate the bicentennial anniversary. At the time, 3 cents was an important U.S. postage rate, so millions of these stamps were produced and used by the public. Because of that large production, this particular stamp is not considered extremely rare as an individual stamp. However, age alone is not the only factor collectors consider. Condition, centering, gum, perforations, cancellation, and whether the stamp has been hinged or never hinged can all affect its market value. Now, let's talk about the most important part of this video: the value. Based on current market information and recent examples, an ordinary used example of the 1932 3-cent Washington stamp can have a very modest value, often around a few cents to under $1, depending on condition and demand. Recent marketplace examples show used Scott 720 stamps selling for around $1 or less, while specialist sources commonly offer ordinary examples for well under $1. This means you should be careful when you see internet listings claiming that a normal 1932 3-cent Washington stamp is worth thousands or even millions of dollars. An asking price is not the same thing as a real selling price. The actual market value is determined by what collectors are willing to pay for a genuine example with the specific characteristics they want. If your stamp is unused, the situation can be somewhat different. An unused or mint example with good original gum can be more desirable than an ordinary used stamp. A mint never hinged example means that the original gum on the back has not been disturbed by a hinge or other mounting method. Recent sales and dealer listings show that ordinary mint examples can still trade for relatively low prices, sometimes around $1 or a few dollars depending on condition. One recent 2026 sale of a Scott 720, described as mint, never hinged, sold for about $1.29. Another specialized booklet pane variety, Scott 720B, sold for about $14.81. This is an important reminder that the exact variety and format can make a difference. A standard single stamp should not automatically be valued at the same price as a specialized variety or a complete booklet pane. Condition is one of the biggest factors you should examine before deciding what your stamp might be worth. First, look carefully at the perforations around all 4 sides. Are they complete and sharp, or are some perforations missing, torn, or damaged? Next, examine the paper for creases, folds, tears, thinning, stains, or other damage. Centering is also important. A stamp with the printed design well centered inside the perforations generally looks more attractive to collectors than a heavily off-center example. If the stamp is unused, the back should also be examined carefully for original gum. Do not peel anything from the back and do not attempt to clean the stamp, because improper handling can permanently reduce its value. The cancellation is another important clue. The stamp shown in our video appears to be presented as a single collectible stamp, but from a photograph alone, we should not assume a precise grade or market price. If a stamp has a clear postal cancellation, it is generally considered used. Some collectors actually prefer stamps with interesting or historically significant cancellations, especially when the cancellation is clear and identifiable. However, an ordinary used cancellation on a common stamp usually does not create a huge premium. Collectors should also be aware of varieties and special formats. The standard Scott 720 is common, but specialized catalog listings can include different printing formats, booklet, panes, or other collectible characteristics. For example, the booklet pane version Scott 720B can command a higher price than an ordinary single stamp. This is why identifying the exact stamp is important before assigning a value. Never assume that every 1932 3-cent Washington stamp is identical simply because the portrait looks similar. So, what could your particular stamp be worth today? If you have an ordinary used Scott 720 in average condition, a realistic expectation is generally a very small amount, potentially just a few cents to round a dollar. A cleaner and better preserved example may attract more interest, while a desirable unused or never hinged example could potentially reach a few dollars, depending on condition and the buyer. Specialized varieties, booklet panes, exceptional centering, or unusual collectible characteristics can bring higher prices. But for a normal single stamp, claims of thousands or millions of dollars should be treated with extreme caution unless there is strong evidence from a recognized catalog or verified auction results. And this is where many new collectors make a mistake. They search online, find a seller listing a common stamp for $5,000, $20,000, or even more, and assume that is the stamp's value. But anyone can place a high asking price on an online marketplace. The more reliable approach is to look at completed and sold transactions, reputable stamp dealers, recognized catalogs, and professional auction results. The difference between an asking price and a realized price can be enormous. If you own one of these stamps, don't throw it away simply because it may not be worth a fortune. The historical value is still fascinating. This stamp connects us with American postal history and with the 1932 celebration of George Washington's bicentennial. It is nearly 100 years old and represents an important period in the development of U.S. postage. For collectors, thousands of ordinary stamps can become interesting when they are studied as part of a larger collection, especially when combined with postal covers, cancellations, varieties, and other Washington issues. Before selling your stamp, carefully inspect both sides under good lighting and, if possible, use stamp tongs rather than your fingers. Avoid using tape, glue, water, or household cleaning products. If you believe you have an unusual variety or a particularly high-quality example, consider getting an opinion from a reputable philatelic dealer or professional auction house. The exact Scott number, condition, centering, gum, perforations, and provenance can make a significant difference in determining a fair market price. So, the big question is this 1932 3-cent George Washington stamp worth millions? For the standard Scott 720 single stamp, the answer is no. It is a relatively common issue, and ordinary examples generally have modest market values. But that does not make it uninteresting. Its real appeal comes from its age, historical connection to George Washington, beautiful violet design, and place in American postal history. And if your example has an unusual variety, exceptional condition, or special format, it could be worth more than an ordinary copy. Next, a beautiful vintage United States postage stamp featuring George Washington. This purple or deep violet 3-cent Washington stamp was issued in 1932, making it more than 90 years old. If you have found a stamp like this in an old collection, envelope, family album, or box of inherited stamps, you may be wondering how much it could be worth in today's market. Is it a rare Washington stamp worth hundreds or thousands of dollars? Or is it a more common collectible worth only a small amount? In this video, we will look at its history, identification, condition, varieties, and realistic market value in today's US dollar market. The stamp shown here is the 1932 3-cent George Washington issue. commonly identified as Scott number 720. It features a portrait of George Washington in a deep violet or purple color, with the denomination 3 cents displayed in the lower corners. This issue was released on June 16, 1932, after the U.S. first-class letter rate increased to 3 cents. The stamp was printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing using the rotary press, with perforations measuring approximately 11 by 10 and 1/2. The Washington portrait was based on the famous painting by Gilbert Stuart, the same general portrait image associated with Washington on the $1 bill. Unlike the earlier Washington bicentennial stamps, this 3-cent issue does not include the 1732 and 1932 anniversary ribbons. These details are important because they help collectors distinguish this stamp from other Washington issues from the same period. Now, let's talk about the most important question. What is this stamp actually worth today? For a normal used single example of Scott 720, the market value is generally modest. Current dealer and marketplace listings show ordinary used examples available for roughly 10 cents to 50 cents, depending on condition and seller. One recorded marketplace sale was only 10 cents for a used example, while another current listing offers a used example around 22 cents. A dealer listing also shows an example around 50 cents. These prices demonstrate that the standard used version is not normally a high-dollar rarity, but don't stop there, because condition can make a significant difference. If your stamp is unused or mint, especially if it has original gum and has never been hinged, collectors may be more interested. Current examples show that ordinary mint examples can still be inexpensive, with some listings around 75 cents, and other mint never hinged examples offered for a few dollars. One recent marketplace listing for a mint never hinged, fine to very fine example was around $3.48. A recorded sale of another mint never hinged example was only 20 cents. Showing just how much prices can vary according to quality, centering, gum, and the particular seller or transaction. The stamp in today's image appears to be a single 3-cent Washington stamp with the classic purple design. From a photograph alone, however, we cannot determine an exact grade or certified value. Collectors need to inspect the back as well as the front. Look closely at the perforations around every edge. Are they complete and sharp, or are there missing teeth and damaged areas? Next, examine the paper for creases, tears, thinning, stains, or other defects. Centering is also important. A stamp where the design is evenly positioned inside the perforations is generally more attractive than a heavily off-center example. If the stamp is unused, the condition of the original gum on the back can also have a major impact on collector interest. Another important factor is whether the stamp is a normal Scott 720 or a specialized variety. There is a booklet pane variety known as Scott 720B. Instead of being an ordinary single stamp, this is a booklet pane of 6 stamps, and it is considerably more interesting to collectors. A current dealer listing for the 1932 3-cent Washington booklet pane of 6 shows a price of about $42.50. That is dramatically different from the value of an ordinary single stamp, which demonstrates why identifying the exact format is essential before making a valuation. There can also be unusual errors or pre-cancel varieties associated with Scott 720. For example, marketplace listings show examples with inverted precancels being offered for significantly more than ordinary copies. One inverted pre-cancel example was listed around $15 to $20, while another inverted Wisconsin overprint was listed around $32.50. However, these are specialized varieties and asking prices are not the same as confirmed selling prices. You should never assume that an ordinary Scott 720 is worth this much simply because a special error variety appears online at a higher price. This brings us to an important lesson for every stamp collector. When you search online for the value of an old stamp, you may see extremely high prices. But an online asking price does not automatically represent the real market value. Anyone can list an ordinary stamp for hundreds or thousands of dollars. What matters much more is documented sales, reputable dealers, auction results, recognized catalogs, and the exact condition and variety of the stamp. For a standard used 1932 3-cent Washington stamp, the evidence from current marketplace listings points toward a value generally measured in cents rather than hundreds or thousands of dollars. So, if you have a stamp like the one shown in this video, what should you do? First, don't clean it. Don't use water, chemicals, tape, glue, or household products to try to improve its appearance. These actions can permanently damage a collectible stamp. Instead, handle it carefully with stamp tongs and keep it in a proper protective sleeve or album. Examine both sides under good lighting. Look for unusual perforations, printing characteristics, preconsils, overprints, exceptional centering, and original gum. If you believe your stamp is a special variety or unusually high-grade example, getting an opinion from an experienced philatelic dealer can be worthwhile. The historical story behind this stamp is also fascinating. In 1932, the United States was celebrating the bicentennial of George Washington's birth, and Washington appeared on numerous postage issues during this period. The 3-cent stamp was especially important because it corresponded with the new first-class letter postage rate. The design's deep violet color and Washington portrait give it a distinctive appearance that makes it easy for collectors to recognize. Even though the ordinary example is not extremely valuable financially, it remains an interesting piece of American postal history that is now more than 9 decades old. So, here is the final value range to remember. A normal used 1932 3-cent Washington Scott 720 can realistically be worth around 10 cents to 50 cents in ordinary marketplace examples, with condition and demand affecting the price. Some better quality mint examples can reach a few dollars, while specialized varieties, booklet panes, or genuine errors can be worth considerably more. A booklet pane of 6, for example, is currently listed by one established dealer around $42.50. But for the ordinary single stamp shown here, you should not expect a fortune simply because it is old. The most important thing is accurate identification. Your stamp could be common, or it could have a feature that makes it more interesting to collectors. Check the denomination, color, perforations, gum, cancellation, centering, and format before deciding on a price. And remember, the condition of a stamp can sometimes be more important than its age alone. Next up, a beautiful purple 3-cent United States postage stamp featuring the Statue of Liberty. If you have found a stamp like this in an old family collection, stamp album, envelope, or box of vintage postage, you may be wondering if it is rare and how much it could be worth in today's US dollar market. This stamp has an interesting history, and although most examples are not extremely valuable, certain versions and exceptionally high-grade examples can be worth significantly more. So, stay with us as we examine the identification, history, condition, varieties, and realistic market value of the Statue of Liberty stamp. The stamp shown here is the 3-cent Statue of Liberty issue from the United States Liberty series. It is commonly identified as Scott number 1035 and was issued in 1954. The stamp features the Statue of Liberty in a deep violet color, with the words U.S. postage and 3 cents at the top. The famous phrase "In God We Trust" appears across the design, while the word Liberty is printed prominently at the bottom. The stamp was issued on June 30, 1954, and was printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing using the rotary press. It has perforations measuring approximately 11 by 10 1/2. These details are important because there are other U.S. stamps featuring the Statue of Liberty, and collectors need to identify the exact issue before trying to determine its value. Current specialist references identify this issue as Scott 1035, with the color described as deep violet. Now, let's get to the question that most collectors want answered. How much is this stamp worth today? The standard Scott 1035 is actually a fairly common collectible stamp, so an ordinary single example is usually worth much less than the dramatic prices sometimes seen on the internet. Current dealer listings show ordinary examples around a few tens of cents. For example, one specialist dealer currently lists a mint example of Scott 1035 at about 35 cents, while another dealer lists a used example at approximately 25 cents in Canadian currency. These prices give us a useful indication that an ordinary single stamp is generally a low-dollar collectible rather than a rare fortune. If your stamp is mint and has never been hinged, it may attract more collector interest, especially if it has fresh original gum and excellent centering. But even mint condition does not automatically make a common stamp extremely valuable. A recent marketplace listing for a mint never hinged Scott 1035 was offered at about $1.65, while another mint example, with the wet printing variety, actually sold for 99 cents in March 2026. This is a very important point for collectors. Being old, unused, or beautiful does not automatically mean a stamp is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. The exact variety and grade matter. Condition is one of the most important things you should check. Start by looking at the front of the stamp under good lighting. Examine all four edges and make sure the perforations are complete. Missing perforations, tears, creases, stains, or thinning can reduce collector interest. Next, look at the centering. A stamp with the design nicely centered inside the perforations is generally more attractive than one that is heavily shifted toward one side. If the stamp is unused, carefully examine the back for original gum. Never try to clean the gum or remove anything stuck to the back. Do not use water, chemicals, tape, glue, or household cleaning products because these can permanently damage a collectible stamp. The cancellation is another factor. A used stamp with a normal cancellation is generally inexpensive because so many examples of this issue exist. However, unusual cancellations, precancels, plate markings, or other postal history features can sometimes make an otherwise common stamp more interesting to collectors. This is why you should inspect the entire stamp rather than judging its value only from the portrait on the front. If your stamp has an unusual marking or cancellation, it may be worth researching separately. There are also different printing characteristics associated with Scott 1035. The Liberty series included wet and dry printing varieties, and specialist collectors may pay closer attention to these differences. A normal example may be inexpensive, but specialized varieties in exceptional condition can be worth much more. For instance, a recent listing for a superb grade 98 mint never hinged Scott 1035 with a C certificate was priced at $77.99, and the listing referenced a 2024 SMQ value of $100 for that grade. That is a huge difference compared with an ordinary example worth less than $1. But remember, this premium comes from exceptional certified condition and not simply from the fact that the stamp is a 1954 Statue of Liberty issue. Another interesting possibility is an error. Errors are very different from normal examples and can command substantially higher prices. A recent listing for a block of 4 Scott 1035 stamps with the dramatic ink starvation error was priced at $85. This is not the value of a normal single stamp. It is a specialized error variety in a block of 4. If you discover something unusual about your stamp, don't immediately assume it is an error. Compare it with reliable references or ask an experienced philatelist for an opinion before assigning a high value. There is also a booklet pane variety associated with this issue. Scott 1035A is the booklet pane of 6 stamps, and a current specialist dealer lists this booklet pane at around $5. Again, this shows why the exact format matters. A single ordinary stamp, a booklet pane, plate block, and a certified superb example can all have very different market values even though they share the same basic design. So, if you have exactly one stamp, like the example shown in this video, what should you realistically expect? For an ordinary used single, Scott 1035, the value may be around 25 cents or less to perhaps under $1, depending on condition and the marketplace. An ordinary mint example may also commonly sell for around a few cents to a couple of dollars. A special booklet pane may be worth several dollars, while a genuinely exceptional certified example can reach tens of dollars or more. Rare errors and major varieties can potentially reach much higher prices. These ranges are examples from current listings and sale, not a guarantee of what every individual stamp will sell for. And this brings us to one of the biggest mistakes made by new stamp collectors. When searching online, you may find a seller asking $50, $100, or even hundreds of dollars for a stamp that looks identical to yours. Don't assume that asking price is the real market value. Sellers can choose any asking price they want. The better method is to look for completed sales, reputable dealers, auction results, and recognized catalog information. You should also compare the exact catalog number, condition, centering, gum, cancellation, and variety. Two stamps that look almost identical can have completely different values if one is a normal used example and the other is a rare certified variety. The history behind this stamp is another reason it is worth keeping. The Statue of Liberty is one of the most recognizable symbols of the United States. The monument, formerly known as Liberty Enlightening the World, was a gift from France and was dedicated in New York Harbor in 1886. By featuring the Statue of Liberty on this 1954 postage stamp, the U.S. Postal Service connected everyday mail with one of America's most powerful symbols of freedom and immigration. More than 70 years later, the stamp remains an interesting piece of American postal history and a popular subject for collectors. If you own one of these stamps, take a few minutes to inspect it carefully before selling or discarding it. Look at the color, perforations, centering, gum, cancellation, and back of the stamp. Check whether it is a single stamp, booklet, pane, plate, block, or another format. If you notice an unusual printing feature, don't alter the stamp. Keep it protected in a proper stamp mount or album, and consider getting a second opinion from a knowledgeable stamp dealer or professional philatelist. So, is this purple 3-cent Statue of Liberty stamp worth millions of dollars? For a normal Scott 1035 single stamp, the answer is no. Most ordinary examples have modest values, generally measured in cents or a few dollars. But the story becomes more interesting when we move into rare errors, unusual varieties, booklet panes, and exceptionally high-grade certified examples. A superb certified Scott 1035 has recently been offered around $78, while a dramatic error block has been listed at $85. These examples show that the real value comes from rarity, condition, and specific characteristics, not simply from age. The biggest lesson for every collector is simple: never judge a vintage stamp by its age alone. Identify the exact issue, inspect its condition, research the variety, and compare real market evidence before deciding what it is worth. That approach will help you avoid unrealistic internet claims and give you a much better understanding of your collection. If you enjoy discovering the history and market value of old American stamps, make sure to follow Liberty Quarter Dollar for more videos about rare U.S. postage, vintage stamps, collectible coins, and fascinating pieces of American history. Keep checking those old albums, family collections, and envelopes, because you never know what interesting stamp might be hiding there. Even when a stamp isn't worth a fortune, it can still be an important piece of history, and sometimes one small variety or printing error can make a surprisingly big difference.